Hey everybody, welcome back to another crash course video. I hope you all know the drill. I'm just gonna fairly quickly build my deck, show you what are good choices, what are not, without getting too deep into the individual stats and whatnot. And today we're gonna take a look at USA, which is a deck that you can build in a lot of different ways. Logistics alone, do you take 4 or 5 cards of logistics? You get 60 activation points. That's a decision you have to make for yourself. First of all, as always, Infantry CV, basically always a good choice. Humvee CV, basically the best Jeep CV in the game. It's 6 per card base, thanks to the 10% availability bonus, you get even 7. It has 10 HP as opposed to 5. It has a 50 cal, which is honestly not to be underestimated, and good off-road speed. So if you want to take a CV with a high availability, that's really your best choice. One of the best choices in the game, honestly, because when it comes to HE damage, it takes just as much damage as a lav, although the lav is amphibious. In any case, for this deck, I'm gonna choose 5 cards. I'm gonna choose Tacom and Blackhawk because it's fast. It has 6 HP. Minigun, ignore it. Next, I'm gonna take the Humvee. And the third card with the Abrams. You can leave the Abrams away, but I feel like with 6 activation points I can have the luxury. Supply trucks, I'm not a fan of 40 points, nor am I a fan of 50 points, but whatever, both are viable, of course. Infantry tab is very interesting. Despite what people say, US actually has a very strong infantry tab, just in a different way. First of all, the core of your deck, the core of your infantry tab, base rifleman in the M113A3. Make sure to take this one with 3 front and 3 side armor, not the basic one with 1 front and 1 side. This is your main spam. You want 2 cards of these. You can upvote them, but the veterans, it really doesn't matter. But you really want 2 cards, and you really want to just spam them. Whether you like it or not, that is by far the strongest way to play with US infantry. Of course, do whatever you want, but if you wanna, even if you're not tryharding, this is just, even if you don't like spamming them as much, you should at the very least take 1 card. And now we come into the territory where there's a lot of different things you can do. Light Rifleman, both base and 90s. Don't think just because it has bad range, bad accuracy, and bad AP, this is bad. This is still a 10-point, 10-man squad with an MG as well. So both the 90s and the base ones are just fine to use. Use them in the Humvee. Don't bother with the helicopters. For this deck, I'm gonna use the 90s. Then we want some heavier anti-tank weaponry. What you can do is you can either take Rifleman 90, preferably in the 5-pointer in my opinion, works well to spam them in between of base Rifleman, or you can take small. I prefer them in the Humvee, so I have something fast. They're also decent against infantry, don't underestimate them. Of course, with only 5 HP, they can be a bit squishy, especially against artillery. But in low intensity engagements or in between of riflemen, they do a very good job. And this can already be your infantry tab. I think it depends on if you want to use 5 cards of logistics as well as 5 cards of supply. For me, I'm usually running 4 cards of support. I like to run a 5th infantry card. Putin, for example, runs 4th most of the time, I believe, and I like to run stingers. In fact, lately I've been running Stinger A in the M2A2. You can also run the Stinger C in the M2A2 or the M2A1, or you can either of them in the 5-pointer. It's really completely up to you, but I really like manpads in general, and I feel like they're fairly easy to fit in US because you really only need 4 cards of infantry anyway. And they're also really useful in US specifically. We'll come to that in support. So lately, or in the deck that I've looked up, what I had, I have them in the Stinger. Just to have access to both manpads as well as a card of Bradley's. And the A Stinger because the availability really. And for what they do, I don't really care about 50 or 70%. So yeah. But of course, you can also just instead run Stinger C. It's up to you. And now that the thing about it, if you run the badly, it's probably better to run down with the Stinger C, because then 5 points don't really make a big difference. Going into support. I'm not one who likes to run the RT. In 1v1s, in team games, the attack amps is one of the strongest support assets ever, or period. In 1v1s, it can also do a lot of work, but it can also just be complete waste of points. It's harder to get consistent value out of it, so I like to not run it. The Paladin, it is a 10-second aim time artillery piece, but it has not the best rate of fire. M10s are fine as well, but I don't like running them. I prefer to run 5 cards of infantry and logistics, because the 5th card with 3 AP is fairly expensive. Then we have the Patriot, of course. In 1v1s, I would probably down-vet it, up-vet it, excuse me. You can also down-vet it, but I feel like you want the Patriot for one to be, if you pay 120 points, you don't want it to only start being like actually kill banes after the 3rd or 4th lane. You want it to be impactful immediately for what you pay. Then the Chaparrals, they're not amazing, and that's also one of the reasons why I like to put Stinger in, so I have some more anti-helicopter coverage. The Chaparrals are just fairly easy to kill, even with helicopters. So they can be a bit frustrating at times, but there's just nothing else you get. A Pivot's basically a must. It's just incredibly versatile, and with its 0.2 seconds aim time, it's just incredibly strong. Hawk Pip 3, you can also run maybe instead of the Chaparral, especially since you have the Pivots and Stinger as well. Don't underestimate the helicopter range. You just don't be very aggressive with it, but you don't have to have it very close at the front line for the range to be effective. I learned it myself. In the past, I really thought it's a garbage unit. These days, I think it's actually not that bad. And yes, running both the Hawk Pip 3 and the Patriot does make sense, believe it or not. And last but not least, a Mortar. I like to run it because I'm in general a tank-focused player. In US, it's not necessarily necessary, depending on how you play it. If you're a very A10 and Raven-focused player, something like that, like Putin, for example, he does, last time I checked, not run a Mortar, for example. I still like it. Of course, I can't force you to do anything you don't like. In the end, it's up to you, but this is just me giving rough tips. Tank Tab is very interesting. M1A2 might be, of course, in team games, you really want it. And 1v1s, probably the least necessary super heavy, if that makes sense, just because you have so many anti-tank options, heavy anti-tank options, that running the H.A. Abrams as your heaviest tank is completely feasible. Very easily done. But me personally, I still like to use the M1A2. And I think, biggest, strongest tank in the game, gun-wise, I think a lot of people would still like to run this. H.A. Abrams, it's just a very solid, heavy tank without going into super heavy category. Very tanky, mobile, decent gun. Not the best autonomy, but can't have everything. Then it's, in my opinion, for 1v1s, the choice between the IP and the M1A1. M1A1 is not too bad, but with 17 armor, you do get double shot, double tap by Erix's, Bombars, Peace Shrines, Milan 3s, RBS 56, a lot of anti-tank weaponry, A10s, Peace Pheasants, etc. So it's not the best armor threshold, but you will survive the 30 AP missile at least. I nowadays run the M1 IP, and this is a core, both for 1v1 and team games, the M1 Abrams. It's your go-to spam for forest to deal with anything that isn't really a heavy tank. Spam that together with Rifleman, and everything in the forest, again, that isn't a super heavy will just get destroyed. It's essentially, in a sense, a beam PT light. It does very well against infantry, 9 RPM, 2 MGs, 15 front armor, it's fast. Yeah, and don't underestimate having 2 MGs. For team games, you generally want to go heavier. You want the HC Abrams as well. Instead of the HA, and then the HA instead of the IP, and then just the M1, for example. But for 1v1s, you don't want such a heavy tank setup. Recon type, of course, the longbow. In my opinion, quite possibly the most broken unit in the game, believe it or not. Even though everyone just complains about DLC, I think this is actually the worst unit in the game, balance-wise. Then you have a lot of choices here. You can run a card of Navy SEALs if you really are struggling with town fights as US, and stuff like, I didn't mention them, but Delta Force, which can be fine in Humvee, don't cut it. Then a card of Navy Seals can be fine. Rangers are incredibly solid. I run 2 cards, one in the Chinook, one in the V150. Why the Chinook and not the Blackhawk? That's actually something that Putin showed me. Because you want to buy the helicopter, actually. You unload your infantry and then you pull back your helicopter and put it into safety. Why do you put it into safety? Because if you're a really cancerous player and you really like doing that, then you wait until you're doing a big air assault with, I don't know, Nighthawks, Thunderbolts, your longbow, anything along those lines, and you send in the Chinook first to sponge missiles and detect AA. And with 10 HP, it is quite tanky for a helicopter. The Bradleys are fine, both the 60 and the 80 point one. The LEV Scout, even if it's just gonna get absolutely shreked by Hachinanas, AMX Sense, and the like, is still a good choice. Cavalry Scouts, not that horrible. Cobra, I like to run. It's just very good in the opener for flanks to detect stuff sneaking around, and just good emergency fire support if you need something fast. Vehicles, there's only one thing that you really have to put in here. I mean, the combat is fine. CEV is decent, although not needed since you have the base M1 Abrams. Ontos can be fun, but also not a huge fan. The V150s are not absolutely horrible, but again, I wouldn't suggest using it, because everything else that anything that it has, anything on wheels that it would have, holy shit, I can't talk. Anything on wheels that it would fight against. KTs, BRM3s, BATR90s, MX Sense, they most likely lose against anyway. But the CS is just absolutely amazing. Offensively, defensively, base defense, even sometimes shooting down helicopters. That thing is absolutely ridiculous, fires until it's empty, with a crazy rate of fire, good anti-ground range, 20 points, stuns very fast, it just melts shit. Like, the DPS on that thing is just insane, and just panics tanks instantly as well. Helicopter. One important choice, it's a DAP. Why the DAP? It's 6 HP, it's fast, it has medium optics, and has stingers. It's fairly cheap, so if you open with one and the enemy has no helicopters for you to kill, you didn't waste too many points. It can spot for itself. It's just one of the best, if not the best anti-air helicopter in the game, depending on how you look at it. And then I like to run another helicopter. Although in this case it's not really necessary. I like to run the 60-point Cobra. Basically, for the same reason I run this Cobra as well, which is for flanks stuff, but this Cobra has a much easier time to deal with, lightly armored vehicles like BTR-90s and such. So given that I have this, you could easily replace, the Cobra with something else, with one of the Bradleys, maybe Navy Seals, LEV, something along those lines. And then air, which is quite possibly maybe the strongest or most important tab in here. Let's get the strong stuff out of the way. A10 and Raven, incredibly strong combination. Despite the 2 front and 2 rear armor, it is fairly easy to lose this. You have to have a good idea of what anti-air is on the field for you to use it, and you need to be able to protect this against enemy ASFs. If you sometimes look at games of someone like Putin or even me, although I don't really use it very often, use that A10 to great effect. It might look very easy, but you really need to know or have a good idea of what AA is on the field and can you tank it or can you kill it even better. But if you are decently able at doing that, then this thing can just shut down the whole opponent, coupled with the Raven. Raven, of course, good stealth, the best stealth of any seaplane, higher stealth than any other. That is an incredibly high asset. 60% ECM, highest ECM in the game, maximum range for seat missiles, and very fast. And high time over target. You can also run the Prowler instead if you want super cards and still high end. It still has very good range, very good accuracy, very good ECM, and has stealth. Not the fastest, but is still one of the best seaplanes in the game. And if you really want super cards, especially for team games, you might actually prefer the Prowler. Then this is a good option. Just do not run the where is it? The F4. Don't run the Wild Weasel. That thing is garbage. Although it looks cool. Then you want the Nighthawk. Nighthawk is, I hopefully don't need to say it, it's just incredibly strong. And then here's the thing. Do you run 2 ASFs? You need to protect the Thunderbolt. You need to protect the Nighthawk. You also, in a case, have to Patriot for that. So do you run 2 cards of ASFs? Some people like to run, for example, a Sea Eagle and the A Eagle that's right next to it. You can also run the Tomcat, which is, in a sense, a pseudo Patriot and a Block 52, or just a Block 52, and this is what I like to run, the Napalm Phantom, or you want the Hornet. Especially for team games, you might really want the Hornet for a quick and fast, for a quick and fairly consistent super heavy deleter. Well, in 1v1s, not that necessary anymore. In team games, you might really want to put that in, so keep that in mind. And I think that is basically it. Just over 50 minutes. For any further questions, put them in the comments. And a bit of a hasty episode. I'm recording this like 1 hour before it's up on YouTube, so don't really have the time to do another take. I hope you still learned something. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll hopefully see you next time.